I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that maybe I was just paranoid, but deep down I knew something was horribly off. In Ephesus, it happened again. As I sat alone at a bar, lost in my own thoughts, I saw him standing there in the distance, his silhouette framed by a flickering streetlight. My heart skipped a beat. It was the same man, wearing the same outfit, staring in my direction. This time, I didn't just feel uneasy. I felt like prey, being stalked by something predatory. I quickly tried to avoid looking at him, but I could feel his gaze burning into me, even from a distance. When I finally looked up, he was gone, vanished, without a trace. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that I was just imagining things, but the sense of being hunted didn't leave me. That night I couldn't sleep. The nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach refused to subside. I had to know if I was truly being followed. The next morning in Volos, I didn't even bother exploring the city. Instead, I stood by the gangway, watching each person disembark, scanning the crowd for any sign of the man. But he never appeared. By the time we reached Thessaloniki, the last city on the itinerary, I was convinced I was losing my mind. I couldn't just stay on the boat, though, so I reluctantly ventured out into the streets, trying to enjoy the sights despite the unease that gripped me. And there he was again. Only this time, something changed inside me. Instead of fear, I felt an inexplicable rush of adrenaline. I shouted at him, demanding to know what he wanted, and he turned and fled. Without thinking, I chased him, following him down narrow, unfamiliar streets until he disappeared around a corner. When I turned that corner, he was gone, vanished, as if he had never existed. I couldn't shake the image of him from my mind, even as the ship made its way back to Athens. Every moment since that encounter had felt like a blur, but the unsettling feeling lingered. I was consumed by the need to understand what was happening, to make sense of the man who seemed to be following me from city to city. Back home, I sat at my desk, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through police reports and missing persons databases. And then, I found it. A photo that stopped me dead in my tracks. The man, the one who had been following me, his face staring back from a missing persons notice. His name sent chills down my spine. It was the same as my late husband's. My heart raced as I clicked through the details of the report. He had been reported missing nearly 2 years earlier, his last known location, Greece. I called the police immediately, my voice shaky as I recounted everything I had seen. After a long silence, the operator's voice returned, colder than before. She informed me that the case had been closed. He was found dead, drowned in a boating accident, off the coast of Parga, Greece. The same month, the same day my husband had died. I hung up the phone, my entire body numb with fear. How could this be? How could the man I'd seen in those cities have been dead all this time? And why had he been following me? The more I tried to understand, the more questions surfaced, each one more terrifying than the last. Weeks passed, but the dread never left me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. Everywhere I went, I felt as though someone was watching, as though he was still out there. The memory of his face, the cold stare that pierced through me, haunted my every waking moment. Then, at a family wedding in Athens, it happened again. As if on cue, I saw him. There he was, standing by the bar, his expression unchanged, his gaze fixed on me. I froze, my blood running cold. Could it be him? Or was I just losing my mind? The crowd around me blurred into nothing as I locked eyes with him for a split second, before he vanished into the throng. It didn't matter. I had seen enough. I had vowed never to set foot in Greece again, but this was different. This was more than just a trip. It was a nightmare I couldn't escape. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, like a dark cloud looming over me, threatening to swallow me whole. Even now, looking back, it all feels like a sick joke, a cruel twist of fate. I couldn't explain it. The way he kept showing up, the way he seemed to know exactly where I'd be even before I did. Was it a coincidence? Or was he still following me? I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much of it didn't add up. And then one day, I stumbled across something that shook me to my core. His name, his face, the very man who had tormented my every step for months, was on a missing persons report. But that was impossible. He was dead. How could he be there on the cruise watching me? How could he still be alive? The nightmare was far from over. The more I tried to rationalize what had happened, the more the pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit together in ways I didn't want to admit. The man from the cruise, the missing person with the same name as my late husband, the inexplicable coincidences. It all felt too surreal to be true. Yet there it was. I couldn't escape the thought that perhaps this wasn't some random sequence of events. Maybe it was something more sinister, something beyond understanding. My phone, which I had lost on the ship, had been found and tracked back to the exact spot where I had been. But the most chilling part? It seemed like someone was watching me, even now, even when I thought I was safe. It was like I couldn't outrun this dark force, and no matter how far I went, it would always find me again. I returned home, but the unease followed me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind felt like a reminder that I wasn't alone. I tried to ignore it, to bury it deep in the back of my mind, but it was impossible. The memories of that man, of his stare that burned into me, resurfaced at the most unexpected moments. I thought I was free of him after the trip, but every time I closed my eyes, it was as if I could feel his presence, just out of reach, waiting for the right moment to return. The chilling thought gnawed at me. What if I hadn't just been followed? What if I had been marked? And as the days wore on, I began to wonder if my past, my husband's death, had something to do with it. Was I being haunted by something far darker than I could comprehend? Months passed, and I tried to move on, but the memories of that haunting encounter refused to fade. Then, out of nowhere, during a family gathering in Athens, I saw him again. There he was, standing at the edge of the crowd, wearing the same unkempt beard and disheveled clothes. My heart stopped. He hadn't changed, and neither had my terror. I blinked, hoping it was just the dim lighting or my imagination playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, he was gone, as if he had never been there at all. I felt my blood run cold as the realization hit me. He was still out there, watching, waiting. It was like a nightmare that refused to end. I couldn't take it anymore. That night, I locked myself in my room and scoured the internet for anything, any explanation that could make sense of what was happening. I found myself staring at the same missing persons report I had seen before. The image of the man who had followed me burned into my mind. But this time I noticed something I hadn't before. A date. The date of his death matched the exact day and month of my husband's accident, just 2 years apart. My hands trembled as I realized the connection. This wasn't a coincidence, it couldn't be. The man's death, my husband's passing, the way he seemed to follow me like a shadow. It all pointed to something far more terrifying than I had ever imagined. It was as if the two were somehow linked, their fates intertwined in a way I couldn't begin to comprehend. The fear didn't leave me. Even after returning home, even after weeks passed, that feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, never ceased. A year later, I attended a family wedding in Athens. As I walked into the crowded reception, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. There he was again, standing at the edge of the crowd, dressed in the same worn-out clothes, his gaze fixed in my direction. I blinked, and for a split second, he was gone. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. The man who had haunted my every step, the shadow of my husband's past, was there, still watching. I couldn't shake the feeling that I would never be free of him, and from that moment on, I swore to myself I would never set foot in Greece again.